Hello, everybody. Happy Pride. I'm really excited about today's panel. We are going to be talking about all things to do being disabled, LGBTQ on this day of London Pride, and have a great panel today. I'm really looking forward to having a great chat and hearing some experiences and insights. I'm going to just introduce myself first. And then I'm going to ask my lovely panelists to also introduce themselves. So I'm Faryal, and I am a screenwriter. I'm also a campaigner for disability rights and social justice. And I'm also an associate consultant for Inclusion London. And that's the hat that I'm wearing today. And I'm just going to explain a little bit about what Inclusion London does for those of you that don't know. IL is a fantastic organization that's been around for a good number of years, and they support deaf and disabled people's organizations right across the city to become more sustainable, to thrive, as well as being on the front lines campaigning for disability justice and welfare rights. So that's a little about me, Inclusion London. And I'm now going to pass over to a great panelist to hear an introduction from themselves. So can we start from you, Danielle, with you?
Yes, of course. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's nice to see you. It's nice to meet everyone today. My name is Daniele, and my pronouns are he, him. I am the co-founder and community engagement director of ParaPride. And ParaPride is a nonprofit organization. We focus on the intersection of being disabled and LGBTQ+. We are a fairly young grassroots organization. We are community-led, and we are entirely run by volunteers, and our lived experiences of being disabled and LGBTQ+ are at the core of what we do, the core of our charity values.
Fantastic. And I'm a big fan of ParaPride and the events that you put on. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to speaking more about your work, Danielle. And Indigo, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I'm Indigo. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm a queer, disabled artist, researcher, campaigner person. I am a trustee of Inclusion London, and been there for a few years. And I also work in disability research at the Research Institute for Disabled Consumers. And I also work with another disabled people's organisation, Transport for All, co-producing their archive of accessible transport. Yeah, so lots of different things, but I'm very happy to be here.
Fantastic. So Danielle, you are the founder of ParaPride, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about why and how you came about to set up the organization.
Yeah, so for me personally, the need for an organization like ParaPride came from my lived experience of becoming disabled later on in life. So for context, I'm a lower leg amputee. I walk on prosthetic legs, and becoming disabled taught me how much disabled people are excluded from many aspects of society, and how quickly that can happen. Personally, being a gay man, I could see that there was an evident need to address the lack of inclusion for disabled people within the LGBTQ+ community, and also a need for more accessible LGBTQ+ spaces where disabled people could feel safe and feel included, and also a need to promote body positivity and being able to celebrate that. So yeah, today ParaPride is an empowerment charity that advocates for the visibility, education, and awareness of disabled LGBTQ+ people. We run different projects from community events and performance-based events where we get to showcase disability talent, and also at the same time provide safe space for people to connect and feel included. And we also deliver panel discussion as well as inclusion training and workshops. And this year, for the very first time, we also launched our first awareness campaign called Intersectionality Awareness Week. We had the pleasure to partner with Inclusion London on that. And yeah, so that happened in May this year.
Fantastic. It was a great overview, and I look forward to talking more, particularly about intersectionality and also body positivity further on. But thanks for that, Danielle. And Indigo, as you mentioned that you work with a number of really great disability equality, disability justice organizations, including Transport for All, very close to my heart, of course. Can I ask you kind of what drives you and what drives your work?
Yeah, I think it's the values of disability justice, which is a like framework that was developed by queer disabled women of color, and it really focuses on intersectionality and kind of that cross movement solidarity and collective access and collective liberation. So the idea that our struggles are interconnected and LGBTQ equality is dependent on disabled equality and vice versa. And yeah, I think that drives most of what I try and do.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's really important. And very well, especially in the day and age that we're living in, I think that that interconnectivity of those struggles has become very apparent. Absolutely. So I'm gonna move on to talk about Pride. So it's London Pride today, and definitely Pride has changed, hasn't it? A lot over the last few decades, very much starting having its roots in a protest movement after the Stonewall riots in the States in 1969, protesting against police brutality, against rampant homophobia. And it has changed, definitely joyous, more joyous in some ways, some elements of anger. I'm talking about the main Pride here. But the radical edge, sometimes people say, has gone. But in London, we now have trans Pride, of course. We had Dyke Pride last weekend. I wanted to ask you both what Pride means to you. And also, I'd love to ask you if you can remember your first Pride. So, Danielle, starting with yourself.
Yeah, so this seems like a very simple question, but I find that there's a certain depth to it because you know, I never really have like a straightforward answer because it's a very personal thing and a very unique thing, and it's very different to each one of us.
Sure.
So you know, reflecting on what pride means to me also means that I kind of like have to start removing the more superficial layers of pride that you know, the way most people think of pride this time of year. And you know, for me, pride means acceptance from within, and you know, acceptance of my identities, of my values, of my roots, and also acceptance of my fears, and also the courage and the confidence that it takes to understand and accept who you are. You know, first of all that, and then you know, the courage to be, you know, who you are and live in a society that that is not always accepting and is not always understanding, or is ignorant, and you know, having to confront all of that sometimes, and having to compromise on your own safety, you know, for the sake of living your true self and being proud of it. And it's you know, it's not an easy thing. It still isn't an easy thing. You know, I'm still learning from it, and you know, for some people is different. It can be easier from others than it is, you know, for some people.
Very true. Very
For
true.
me, it's always been hard, you know, you know, because of my unique background, and you know, I guess it's an ongoing journey. And I keep learning from you know, about my pride, and I find these conversations very helpful, you know, because you know, you get to reflect on these things, and also I'm always very interested about learning about other people's experiences about what pride means to them, because it's so different from, you know, from one another. And I do remember my first pride event, let's say, and that I attended when I first moved to London. So this would have been like, you know, more than 25 years ago. And it was called Summer Rights, and it happened in Brockwell Park in Herne Hill. So, you know, my first experience, I think it was linked to, you know, like the more the party aspects, I suppose. I was a younger person back then. But you know, there was also a big sense of freedom and a big, you know, being with a big group of people, and the joy of being with my friends and having not to hide who I was. I think that was, you know, that was a really big feeling. But I think in time I also learned about the history of Pride as well. You know, coming from the riots of the gay community fighting for LGBT rights, and also the interest of the fact that it was led by marginalized communities like the Black communities and Latinos and trans and disabled people. That was a very eye-opening and brought a very different meaning to Pride as well.
Fantastic. So touched by that, Daniel, and everything that you said, because it really does ring true my experience as well. Indigo, just bring you in. What does Pride mean to you?
I really agree with what you were just saying, like the personal aspect of pride, and it means something different to individuals. And what I was thinking about was around kind of unlearning shame, and I found that a lot easier to do with my queer identity than with my disabled identity. I think there's still so much baggage there that I continue to try and like unpick, but pride is also disabled pride for me as much as pride in my LGBTQ identity. And but I was trying to think of what my first pride was, and I think it was when I was a teenager. My dad and my stepmom took me and my first girlfriend and our friend to Brighton Pride, and they
Wow,
drove
what
us there.
parents?
Yeah, and they you know, kept some parts of what we were doing hidden from my friend's parents she wasn't out to. And I remember we drove the wrong way and we ended up driving through the middle of the parade with everyone shouting. My dad was very stressed
You're
out,
the
but it was
parade. Wow. Yeah.
um but it was also, lovely. And I know how lucky I am to have parents who supported me in my identity from when I first talked to them about it. And yeah, that has been so wonderful. And then being a disabled person and having disabled parents, and how like that, it's a kind of more complex feelings around pride there than there are around my sexuality or gender. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for those responses, and they're definitely connected to so much about what you were saying. Indigo, what you're saying about unlearning shame, and Danielle, what you're talking about freedom. I think that's, really, really rang true. And also, it means many different things. I love to go out and party at London Pride, but also there is a sense of we do have still so much to fight for, and remembering and recalling Pride's roots, and the fact that also internationally in so many countries around the world, being LGBTQ is still illegal, is still persecuted, and trying to reach out and remember that. Obviously, living in London, enjoying everything that London has to offer, which is a plurality as well. Like, you know, we do have other prides as well. We have different places of going out and hanging out, that sometimes you can live in a bit of a bubble. And you realize that actually we have a lot of privilege here. But obviously those safe spaces have been fought for as well, right? They didn't just drop out or were allocated by the authorities. Like, you know, our LGBTQ ancestors, if you want to say, or elders have fought for those spaces. So trying to remember that feels very important. But yeah, thank you. Now, both of you have spoken about intersectionality, and how important it is to both of you. And certainly as we grapple, as we enjoy as we also deal with the challenges of being intersectional, having intersectional identities. I wanted to ask you both, like, the joy that those intersectional identities bring and also the challenges as well. So being disabled people, being queer, LGBTQ people. And Danielle, you mentioned the Intersectionality Awareness Week, which I thought was such a fantastic initiative that ParaPride ran, which I felt really privileged to be part of. Because you spent, yeah, can you please, I was going to launch into what you guys did, but I want you to tell us all, because it was very empowering. And yeah, please go ahead and reflect.
Yeah, well, Intersectionality Awareness Week happened in May, like I mentioned earlier. And, you know, I think it came about because it just became like we were increasingly aware of how intersectional our community is, you know, the LGBT community, but also the disabled community, and how we are all as individuals very intersectional in different ways. And you know, so we wanted to launch a yearly awareness campaign that would aim to reflect and to share and to educate the wider society about intersectionality, or intersectional theory, originally developed by the Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, that is historically associated with how people experience overlapping forms of discrimination or disadvantage based on their attributes, and how those relate to the systems of oppression in society. So through Intersectionality Awareness campaign, we wanted to celebrate intersectional identities by promoting a message of empowerment and a message of unity, you know, whilst also sharing those aspects of strengths and struggle that we built through our lived experience of being intersectional individuals. And partnerships was, of course, a very big thing, a big aspect of Intersectionality Awareness Week, and we had the pleasure to partner with Inclusion London and together to
we had a great session, didn't we? It was a really good session, and we will definitely post a link to that so people can kind of to watch it again. It was an international panel of some amazing speakers. Yeah,
we had amazing speakers, and you know, we focused on well, that specific panel was about inclusion and access, but we also, you know, each day of the week we had different events talking about different intersectional communities and marginalized groups, and
included refugees and asylum seekers as well, which I thought was really important and powerful. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so yeah, it was just really good to see how each one of these communities are impacted by the different systems of oppression and structures of discrimination. So yeah, it was a great experience, and we look forward to continuing this.
Absolutely, brilliant. And Indigo, yourself, you've spoken about it, but if there's anything else you wanted to add about, you know, being a disabled LGBTQ person, and what kind of joy and challenges have your intersectional identities brought to you, if anything you would like to share?
Yeah, I think there's so much joy in being disabled and queer, and like especially being non-binary, and it's just there's a lot of space to like rewrite the scripts. Like
I love that.
the like the rules of how you're supposed to behave, or like the way that you might relate to each other as a wheelchair user or someone with chronic illness. I have to communicate quite explicitly around kind of my needs and how I might be touched, how I might like hold someone's hand as we're like going down the street. And similarly with my gender, I feel like it's much more expansive and it's more explicit, and there's a lot more freedom. I think is something that's really nice about gender queerness, disability, and kind of being in community with other people who get that. And I've also found that so many of the disabled people in my life are also LGBTQ, and the LGBTQ but are also disabled. And I know that like Celestine Fraser's recent article, The Disability Debrief, she was talking about how the statistics matched that up as well, that these communities are we're more likely to have intersecting identities around disability and LGBT identities. And yeah, it's a really important thing that I think that hasn't been looked at enough, but also means that for me, there's so much joy there because a lot of the people in my life and my community get it and they understand my experiences, and I've been really, really lucky with that.
Fantastic. I love what you said about rewriting the script. I think that's very powerful. And I'm reminded of one of my favorite songs. I won't play it, don't worry, but it's like, unless you want to listen to it, which is The Gossip Standing in the Way of Control. And that idea that, you know, just by being who we are, we're actually really challenging heteronormativity, we're challenging ableism, we're challenging so much about what is part of the current kind of hegemony of the world that we live in. And that is absolutely very powerful. And likewise, kind of what I wanted to ask you about your, you know, it's great, especially in London, you know, increasingly now we have ParaPride, we have also, you know, I don't know, Indigo, we did speak about it. I don't know if you went to it, but, you know, like nights like the Disabled Queer Prom. And there is, I guess, a burgeoning scene because there is a demand for it of disabled LGBTQ spaces. But like, I was just wondering how, and they have, I think, developed because the mainstream scene is still not very accessible physically or in other ways. I just wanted to say if any of you had any comments on that. And yeah, wanted to talk about that because we're still in this situation where, you know, I'd say some of the major kind of LGBTQ venues are not accessible, which is really scandalous. And that goes across, I guess, a lot of buildings and a lot of, you know, we have the legislative equality, and it's like 20, 30 years ago, I forget, but still inaccessibility is a massive issue. But yeah, your experiences, I guess, of being LGBTQ in the disabled spaces and likewise being disabled in LGBTQ spaces. If anybody had anything to say about that.
Yeah, like you said, so much of kind of LGBT venues in London aren't accessible to me as a wheelchair user. And similarly, London Pride, the actual event, like going out onto the streets, isn't. I remember going a few years ago and it being so crowded and not being able to get to the drop curbs, having someone pat me on the head as I was going past.
Awful.
Yeah, it was really, really bad. And so I think, yeah, we've had to kind of carve out these very unique events. Like, I didn't manage to go to the Queer Disabled Prom in the end, but events like that, groups like the Friends of the Joiners Arms, who are trying to create an accessible LGBT venue in London and haven't been able to find a space, but are continually campaigning for it. It's more that there are groups, I feel like, rather than actual spaces that are there full time for us, which is harder as well because it's rarer and it's not consistent, and you've got to be able to be well enough on that one day to be able to be with your community or be kind of in public and visible and proud, rather than there being someone that's always available to you. Yeah,
Absolutely. And I suppose, Daniel, you put on events, ParaPride put on amazing events. I went to your event in February during LGBTQ History Month, which was great. And how have you found, I guess, yeah, finding those spaces? And it's obviously still a challenge, but yeah, anything to say about that?
Well, I mean, I can really echo what you know, Indigo is saying. I can really relate to the fact that, firstly, you know, like I have, you know, I have intersectional identities. I'm a disabled person. I'm a gay man. I'm a person of color. You know, and all of these identities are something that I feel very close to. I feel enriched by, excuse me, and empowered by. And but you know, they can also present barriers. You know, they can present vulnerabilities and discrimination. You know, when you are out and about and in society, you know, being both disabled and LGBTQ plus can be particularly challenging, and you can experience an increased sense of exclusion, you know, from the disabled community at times because of your sexual orientation or, you know, your gender identity, and you can feel discriminated against, you know, from the LGBTQ plus community because of the lack of access that we, you know, that we know. That we all know of, and I think definitely a lot more can be done and should be done, you know, to make LGBTQ plus spaces and events more inclusive and accessible. You know, this is also a good opportunity to be reminded also that there are issues about accessibility that go beyond the physical barriers as well. You know, that there's accessibility comes in different forms, as we all know. But you know, there are physical barriers and there are physical barriers, and then there are also behavioral or cultural barriers that prevent people from feeling included in society. You know, like many other disabled people, I continue facing ableism even when accessing environments that have been built to be accessible for disabled people. And I think that there's this very common view that people have. You know, when think about accessibility, people often think about step-free access and lifts and ramps and accessible toilet, etc. You know, and of course, like, these are very important aspects and key components of a inclusive society. And infrastructural barriers are one of the biggest issues that, of course, prevent us from feeling included. But, you know, removing those, removing the physical barriers is, in a way, you know, it's fairly simple. It can be done quickly because those are physical barriers. You know, we are pushed back maybe by the cost of doing those things, but I find that a lot of the times the cultural barriers can prove more difficult to remove because they are so deeply rooted in our society, and these are often caused by, you know, the lack of awareness, or, you know, just like the general confusion, or maybe a lot of the times it comes down to you know, poor common sense. But I think that a lot of the time it also because of the you know, the narrative that is the narrative from the general media that portrays the disabled community as a community in need of special care. You know, that misrepresentation of disabled people is also making everyone else think that you know, putting us in a very different in a different light. You know, and you know, there's a lot more to our disability. And I think all of these factors are preventing us from being included, and you know, so yeah, in short, what I wanted to, you know, the point I wanted to put across is that accessibility is not always like about physical barriers. It's also the behaviors and the attitudes that need to change, you know, to be able to feel included in LGBTQ plus spaces and pride events as well.
Excellent, some great points there. Yeah,
can I jump in?
Yeah,
because yeah, it's such a tricky one, right? Because it's so, that kind of patronizing energy, or like pity, the kind of different ways that you're, or judgment for not being believed. It's just kind of a whole area of negative attitudes and behaviors that can be equally as damaging as the physical access things, and are especially present within kind of LGBT situations, in terms of like people thinking my previous girlfriend was my carer rather than like could be my partner, like being patted on the head at a pride event, the kind of idea that disabled people, or certain types of disabled people, couldn't have sexual agency and know their own gender, know their own sexuality, the kind of transphobia and ableism that happens to autistic people who come out as trans, and the idea that you don't know what you are because you're not able to understand your own gender identity, and that's the reason. It's, yeah, a very, I don't know, messy area of ableism that is really vital to think about.
Yeah, and what you're saying absolutely rings true. And I just want to bring in, I guess, very much connected to that, would you say, is this notion, and part of the prejudice and ignorance that we unfortunately have in some sections in the LGBTQ plus scene, is this idea of the perfect body, and for the kind of the cis man, that's the chiseled six pack and the bulging biceps. And also for in a lot of, I suppose, kind of women and non-binary spaces as well, this idea of like there is this sense of, yeah, obviously coming from a very butch femme binary to kind of, yeah, you have to look a certain way, and a lot of that is being very slim and toned and like whatever. So that in itself is a real tyranny. So I wanted to, following on Indigo from what you're saying, like how can we challenge that, and just your comments on that. Just around the body and what is the perfect body, because, and part of the work that we have to do to unpick that, to rewrite the script, as you're saying, to go, is very much is challenge that, right? Because that's not the majority of people. But when you look at publications in particular and websites and people's kind of, I really feel kind of bombarded with that kind of imagery, and I find it's very oppressive.
Yeah. One thing that I was previously doing, so I do a lot of life drawing, and I used to run an event called Dis-Ease, drawing disability in the body. And it was set up so that a disabled person, a disabled life model, would co-create basically like a performance, visual life modeling pose where they were being perceived by an audience of disabled and non-disabled artists for them to draw them, but they were in control of the narrative. They were staring back at you while you were looking at them. And we would start the session with an interview talking about how we're perceived, how people look at us, what kind of judgments they might make on your body or your mind, or how you move, how you like contort. And then to kind of, yeah, take that agency back and feel, when I performed for it and I was the life model, I felt the sense that my body is a good body. It might be in pain, it might need to move and fidget and like might be more bendy than it's meant to, but it is mine, and it's a valuable thing, and a thing that creates good art and doesn't have to be positive, it can be kind of neutral. But it's not any worse for existing outside of the pretend normative ideal body mind of a non-disabled person that doesn't actually exist. And I think creating that space and being around people who saw the world in that way and seeing what I valued in their bodies, and yeah, I can kind of feel less shame about my own when I see other people who are disabled and proud celebrating theirs.
Wow, that's really powerful. And I would love to, yeah, please do those events again, because they sound amazing.
I think I might bring them back.
Yes, please do. Yeah, Danielle, what's your experiences and thoughts on this?
Yeah, it was very interesting listening to Indigo, what you're saying, and it's a very, very good and important topic. And again, it makes me reflect on, my experience, and having lived in London now for many years, more than 25 years, and when I first came here, I was a younger person back then, so usually the place to go to is of course like the West End and Soho, you know, especially for younger people. And and I remember even back then I was able to observe that, you know, looks and status played a very important role if you wanted to fit in. And you know, as a young gay person, I could definitely see that there was pressure on gay men to appear a certain way, you know, to be able to be included and you know, so looking fit and handsome and trendy and, you know, with a bit of money. And, you know, I never felt like I could fit in any of that, you know, and it can be very isolating and it can be very lonely, you know, for anyone. And, you know, I eventually, you know, I created my own circle of friends outside of that environment. And, but I was definitely able to see that there was, you know, there was no space for anyone who was disabled. There was no space for older people. You know, I could hardly see any women, you know, like, and a lot of the times, this is really bad, but a lot of the times, in my experience back then, you know, trans be interested in being in a, you know, place full of like pretentious gay guys, you know, so I probably wouldn't really want to engage with that. But based on my experience back then, you know, and through my observations, I could see that it was a very divided community, and it was mostly dominated by cisgendered white gay men.
Yes, absolutely.
And you know, so for me, you know, because I have you know, I become disabled later on in life, you know, and when I wanted to reconnect with the gay community as a disabled person, based on the experience that I had back then, you know, that made me feel particularly stressed and anxious because you know, like if I was struggling so much back then to fit in, you know, what is it going to be like now as a disabled person? And of course, I didn't want to allow these feelings to, you know, dominate my life. And you know, luckily it didn't. But you know, with the work that we do at ParaPride, you know, we are particularly focused on wanting to promote a message of body positivity in everything we do, you know. And Indigo, earlier on, you said also about like, you know, sexual empowerment for disabled people as well. You know, we are sexual beings, we are talented, we are creative, we are bold, you know, and we are empowered. And we want to be seen that way. I think it's important that we, you know, kind of like change that narrative. That would help.
Yeah, and I remember when I came to your brilliant event in February for LGBTQ History Month, you had a whole panel discussion on sex and about absolutely that. And it was really interesting and insightful and empowering to hear the speakers talk very candidly about lots of different issues. And do you think, Daniel, you spoke about your experiences 20 odd years ago, which I can very much relate to. It's funny, like I grew up in London, and like when you kind of start to come out and you feel, oh, you know, I'm a bit queer, and like Soho becomes this kind of, you have to go to Soho. This was definitely the case 20 odd years ago. And you get a little flutter in your heart as you kind of get off and you walk down Oxford Street. Well, you did back then, but now unfortunately things have changed. And one of the beauties of London is that the scene has actually spread, and it's not just about the venues, but it's about the kind of different nights and lots of different collectives doing different things, which we're lucky to have. But yeah, Soho has it has changed a lot. But I guess I wanted to ask about your experience. Do you think things have improved, is what I wanted to say, from your experiences then to now? And obviously you have been part, Danielle, in trying to create that improvement yourself, obviously informed by experiences, but yeah, just as a wider reflection.
I think there's definitely more awareness now. There are more you know, there's more awareness, and thanks to the solidarity of like groups, you know, and the partnerships and the collaborations that we form, and you know, that sense of togetherness. You know, we are able to talk more about things that need to be talked about. Even just ParaPride coming together with Inclusion London and other organizations and and other groups, and it's really important that marginalized communities are more visible and have that representation, because that is where that is how we will be able to to create more impact in making change and having more inclusion. And so I think in the years, there probably has been a gradual improvement towards a direction that towards like a common direction. And and I think that we should definitely continue focusing on bringing more on working more together. I think that is definitely key.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And that does segue very neatly actually onto the next area that I wanted to talk about, which is about kind of cross-community solidarity, because we are living in an era of cuts, of attacks, and it feels like regression to a very medical model view of understanding disability. We're obviously seeing attacks on the trans community, and we're also seeing, unfortunately, attacks on the disabled community through welfare cuts, cuts on PIP, which, just feel a real betrayal, but also very shocking. And I guess my question was really about how we build strength in ourselves. How do we build the power within to face up to these challenges? And how can we link struggles? Because I think that absolutely, as you're saying, Danielle, is how we challenge not just homophobia and transphobia and heteronormativity, but also how we unpick and challenge disableism. So yeah, so just maybe you want to make some comments on the kind of current political climate, and what you think, or I guess any reflections on that from either of you.
I can go first. There's so much anger and hurt and fear, and it feels like everything's building on top of everything else right now, and it's overwhelming. And you feel like even within the things that we can do, when like it doesn't feel like enough, and it can feel like you don't have enough power. But I think one thing I keep coming back to is like what their name? Adrienne Marie Brown writes about in like pleasure activism, and the idea that we can't just be doing the struggle and the hard graft and the activism as work and labor the entire time and continually fighting. We also need to make space for joy and for doing this type of work joyful and community building, and whether that's like craft nights to build your banners together, whether that's like cooking food for each other, or like having Zoom calls to talk about the rest of things as well, to have a space to vent, but also a space to build relationships and friendships, picnics and resting in bed with other people we need that as much as we need to be on the street trying to make change happen. Disability is really isolating for a lot of people. We individualize it. For a lot of people who haven't learned about the social model or other models of disability, they feel like that's a problem on themselves. And compared to at least my experience of queerness, where I understood it in relation to other people, I had to do a lot of the disability digging on my own. And I think instead, or creating places where we can come together as disabled people to build relationship with each other is a very powerful and important thing.
Fantastic. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And Danielle, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I totally agree. It is such a disappointing thing, you know, and this also made me think about how disabled people are often scapegoated, and you know, in these times of like
Absolutely, very true.
economic hardship, and you know, we are often blamed for the state of like our welfare system, even though it's the systemic barriers that are actually preventing us, you know, from
Mm,
thriving. And what we said earlier about disabled people being misrepresented by the media, and you know, the government kind of like saying that they will ensure that the welfare system will protect the most vulnerable. And,
mm,
you know, this is, again, it's something that, you know, we kind of like reject also because it's the incorrect, you know, the correct misrepresentation of disabled LGBTQ
mm,
plus people.
mm,
And, you know, like, again, like wanting to show us as the community need a special care. But really, you know, we are only disabled by, you know, the barriers presented by society, and
yeah,
in this case, by the barriers presented by the government
yeah,
itself, you
yes.
know. So it's all very messy and very disappointing, and you know, but we will definitely, you know, kind of like be fighting and be, you know, supporting each other as a big community, and hopefully have the support from allies that will be able to you know, will be able to help us in this as well. But yeah, it's all very disappointing.
Yes, it is absolutely. And you know, I was down with a lot of people at the demonstration against the welfare cut bills, and yeah, just obviously it was very disappointing, disheartening, but what was also very inspiring was the fact that so many people came together. And I think absolutely what both of you are saying is that in these times of attack, which it feels like, that you know, solidarity is even more important, and also the times of rest and times of joy as well. Indigo, your point. And also kind of, yeah, that looking out for each other, and that community is really, yeah, more important than ever. um, and Danielle, just on that, so you mentioned that ParaPride will be marching at Pride. So
Yes.
yes, that's
Yeah, yeah.
exciting. So tell me more about that and what your plans are.
Well, we are excited about it. We are also nervous. I've got to
Okay,
be honest,
sure,
because
sure.
you know, Pride in London is not famous for being, you know, the most accessible
Mm,
Pride event. The opposite of that, you know, we have built a relationship with them over the years, you know, just that they have reached out and expressed the fact, you know, and recognize the fact that they want to be more inclusive, and they want to give the space and the visibility to the disabled LGBT community. And you know, so we are having a dialogue with them, and it's, I suppose it's a start, you know.
sure.
So you know, they have taken steps to make things a little bit safer for disabled people. So in short, we will be marching in the Pride in London parade. You know, we are looking forward to it,
Mm,
and you know, we do have a group of ParaPride supporters, and not ParaPride supporters only, but you know, representatives of the LGBTQ plus community, who disabled communities. So yeah, we will be there on the day. I think you know, like, aside of this, it's always a good opportunity and a good platform to be visible and to be represented. So despite the difficulties and the
yeah.
struggles that we will be, you know, like experiencing, you know, like I mentioned earlier, I'm a lower leg amputee. I walk on prosthetics. So it's gonna, I'm not looking forward to a whole day of pain. It will be, like once we are marching, I'm sure that there will be like that great energy and
Yeah.
like that kind of, yeah, that energy will probably keep, but it will be a very tiring day, not only for me. So, but like I said, it's nonetheless a very good opportunity for our community to be seen and to be visible and be together.
And to take up space.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
ultimately, if we stop doing that, if we stop going there, then the accessibility and the disability inclusion will kind of like drop, and it from their priorities, and we don't want that. So at least we will be able to say, look, we have been there.
Absolutely.
This
Yeah.
and this and this, has to change because we want to continue coming. So yeah, we are very not, we are very excited about going and yeah, and we will be in the march. We will also be at Soho Square where the trans stage is. Miss Kimberly, who is a ParaPride.
Yeah. Yes, of course, of course.
Yeah,
Great supporters. Yeah.
yeah,
What
she's a great
provides there
supporter.
then? The
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
performances.
So she invited us to be there, and also she always makes sure that she has disabled performers in her lineup as well. So that's
Yes.
also great visibility. So overall, yeah, we are looking forward to being there, and hopefully it will be a great experience.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. We've had such a great chat. We've put the world to rights, haven't we? And I've really enjoyed the conversation. Could have gone on for much longer. And all power to both of you in the fantastic things that you're doing. And we will be promoting both of your work that you do and yourselves and your organizations. And yeah, happy Pride to both of you. And I look forward to seeing you out on the streets or at a picnic or at a party very soon. And thank you to our brilliant BSL interpreters as well. And yeah, happy Pride, everyone, and see you all very soon.
Thank you very
Happy
much.
Pride.
Happy Pride.